Hi, I'm Joe James, and in this video, I'm going to introduce you to fractions. A fraction is a part of a whole thing. So here we can see a circle which has half of the circle highlighted in blue. So the fraction is 1/2. And each fraction has a numerator, which is the top number, and a denominator, which is the bottom number, or the number of equal-sized parts in the whole. Here we have 2 equal-sized parts, so the denominator is 2. So n over d is what we're looking at in a fraction. This fraction is 1/4 because there are 4 equal-sized parts, so the denominator is 4. And the numerator is 1 because one part is shaded. 1/4 of the whole circle is shaded. Equivalent fractions have the same value. Here we can see half of the circle is shaded red, but half of this circle is shaded green. We have the circle split into 4 equal parts, so 2/4 is the same fraction as 1/2. They're equivalent fractions. And 3/6. There are a lot of different equivalent fractions, or ways of saying the same value, which is 1/2. We can reduce fractions to their simplest form by dividing the numerator and denominator by the same value. In the previous slide, all of those fractions are reducible to 1/2 in their simplest form. 3/6, we can divide both the numerator and denominator by 3, and we get 1/2. If we have a fraction 12/16, we can divide both the numerator and denominator by 4, and we get 3/4. So 12/16 is equal to 3/4. These are equivalent fractions, but it's reduced to its simplest form when it's expressed as 3/4. Reciprocal we can get by switching the top and bottom values, or you can just call it inverting the fraction. So the fraction 2/7, to get the reciprocal, we just flip it upside down, 7/2. And the reciprocal of 5/13 is 13/5. So reciprocal is really simple, but it's important to understand that because we're going to use this concept when we use division later on. Whole number. So if we want to convert a whole number to a fraction, all we have to do is put it over 1. Put the whole number in the numerator and put 1 in the denominator. So 5 expressed as a fraction is 5/1. 17 expressed as a fraction is 17/1. This is a pretty simple concept. A percent. So to express a percent as a fraction, we just put it over 100 and then we reduce. Get used to reducing because you're going to be doing that a lot with fractions. You always want to reduce a fraction to its simplest form. So here we can express 78% as a fraction by taking away the percent sign, put the 78 over 100, and then reduce. So here to reduce, we can see that both numbers are even. They're divisible by 2. So dividing by 2, we get to 39/50, and that's the simplest form. That's the lowest we can reduce it. 51% expressed as a fraction is 51/100, and we can't reduce that. Converting decimal to a fraction, we put the decimal over a 1, and then we multiply the top and bottom by 10 to the n power, where n is the number of decimal places in the decimal. And then we reduce. So for example, 3.25 as a fraction, we put 3.25 over 1, and then since there are 2 decimal places, we're going to multiply the top and bottom by 100. That gets rid of the decimal on the top. We have 325/100. Now we need to reduce. So we can see both these numbers are divisible by 25, so to reduce we just divide by 25 and we get 13/4. That's 3.25 expressed as a fraction and reduced to its simplest form. Another example, 0.7 as a fraction. 0.7 over 1, and then we want to get rid of the decimal, so we multiply both the top and bottom by 10, and we get 7/10, and there's no way to reduce that. A mixed number. Let's say we have a whole number and a fraction combined, like 6 3/4. So to convert that to a fraction, we multiply the whole number by the denominator and then add the numerator. So 6 3/4 as a fraction is 6 times 4 plus 3. And we still keep the same denominator, 4. So we get 27 over 4. Now if we want to multiply fractions, so a fraction times a fraction, we take the product of the numerators over the product of the denominators and reduce. So 1/2 times 3/5 is equal to 1 times 3 over 2 times 5, which is equal to 3/10. So we simply multiply the tops and we multiply the bottoms, and then we reduce. Another example, 7/8 times 2/3. We multiply the tops, or the numerators, 7 times 2 to get 14, and we multiply the denominators, 8 times 3 to get 24, 14/24. We can see these are both even, so we can reduce. We divide by 2, and we get 7/12. Now if we want to multiply a fraction times an integer, well, we remember that we can convert an integer to a fraction just by putting it over 1. And then we follow the same rule we just followed. We multiply the numerators and we multiply the denominators, and then we reduce. So let's say we want to take 1/2 times 6. Well, we'll convert that 6 to a 6 over 1, and then we can multiply the numerators and the denominators. 1 times 6 equals 6, and 2 times 1 equals 2. So we get 6 over 2. And then we can actually divide that out and get a whole number, 3. And intuitively, we can see that 1/2 of 6 is 3, so that makes sense. Now to divide a fraction divided by a fraction, we're going to invert the second fraction, or take the reciprocal, and then multiply and reduce. So invert and multiply to divide. 3/4 divided by 1/6 is equal to 3/4 times 6 over 1. So we simply inverted the second fraction and we changed the division to a multiplication. That's how we divide. Now we know how to multiply. We just multiply the tops and the bottoms, and we get 3 times 6 equals 18 over 4 times 1 equals 4, and we can reduce that to 9 over 2. Now if we have a fraction divided by an integer, we're going to put the integer over 1, invert the second fraction, and then multiply and reduce. So basically the same thing, we just put our whole number over 1 to convert it to a fraction before we do it. So 3/4 divided by 4 is equal to 3/4 divided by 4 over 1. Now we know how to solve this problem. We invert the second number and multiply. So 3/4 times 1/4, and then we multiply. So we get 3 times 1 equals 3, divided by 4 times 4 equals 16, so 3/16. So that's dividing a fraction by an integer. Now let's look at adding and subtracting fractions. This is a little more complicated because to add and subtract fractions, we need to have the same denominator, or the same bottom number. We cannot add and subtract any fractions unless both fractions have the same denominator. So the first step is to change both fractions to the same denominator, then do the add or subtract operation, and then reduce. So let's see how that's done. 3/4 plus 4/5. We can see that the lowest common multiple of 4 and 5, the two denominators, is 20. One way to find that lowest common multiple is just to multiply the two numbers. In this case, that's the lowest common multiple. So how do we convert 3/4 to, what does that equal to over 20? Well, 4 goes into 20 5 times. So we multiply the bottom and top times 5. And the 4/5, we need to multiply the bottom and the top of the fraction by 4, because we can see that 5 goes into 20 4 times. So when we multiply the top and bottom of 3/4 by 5, we get 15, and 4/5 by 4, we get 16 over 20. Okay, so now we've converted both numbers to the same denominator, 15 over 20 and 16 over 20. Now we can just do this as an addition problem. 15 plus 16. So 15 plus 16 is 31, and we keep the same denominator, 20. So probably the hardest part here is to find the lowest common multiple of the two fractions. And in this case, that's 20. And then convert the fractions to that using that lowest common multiple as the denominator. And addition and subtraction both work the same way. Regardless whether you're doing addition or subtraction, it's the same operation. Now, another important feature of fractions is the ability to cross multiply. If two fractions are equal, their cross products are equal. So here we have 3/8 is equal to 9 over 24. And what we know then about these two fractions, since they're equal, we know that 3 times 24 is equal to 8 times 9. So the two cross products of these fractions is equal. That's also useful when we're trying to determine one missing number. We're trying to find an equivalent for our 3/8, and we know the denominator of the new fraction is 24, and this is actually a very common problem when you're using fractions. How do we solve for x? Well, x is just 3 times 24 divided by 8. So we cross multiply and divide to find the x. And it doesn't matter which position the x is in, we're always going to cross multiply and divide to find x. So here it's very easy to do 3 times 24 divided by 8 to find that x equals 9. So how do we solve if we have fractions inside of a fraction? This problem looks crazy. 2/5 over 4/17. How do we solve that? Well, we rewrite the fractions, those two fractions, into a simpler format that we recognize and we know how to handle. And then we solve the problem. So we rewrite this as 2/5 divided by 4/17. Now we know how to solve this problem. It's a standard fractions division problem. So we invert a second fraction and then we multiply. 2/5 times 17 over 4. 2 times 17 is 34. 5 times 4 is 20. We have 34 over 20. Now we simply reduce that. We get 17 over 10. So we basically just changed this problem to a more familiar format that we know how to handle. I put together this cheat sheet to summarize all of the points I covered in this video. I hope it'll help you. If this video was helpful for you, please click the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel. I'm Joe James. Thanks for watching.